So once again, back in Warhammer for a quick battle, and this is a 2v2 on Averheim, and I was playing as the Beastmen, and my ally was playing as the Vampire Council, well, von Carstein in particular. We're up against the Empire and the Dwarfs. Now to quickly run through the army compositions, I have got 6 units of Ungor Spearmen Herd as my sort of cheap disposable front line. I've got a Cygor, I've got 2 Gorbals, my legendary lord is Malagor the Dark Omen, who has wings, but sadly he cannot fly, and 3 Ungor Raiders and 2 Minotaurs with great weapons. I really like the Beastmen, and I really like this sort of layout as well. Very much a fan of the cheap and elite mix that the Beastmen offer, and also very aggressive. Unlike our enemies, who are 2 of the more defensive factions the game has to offer. And now for the von Carsteins, they're bringing some Cairn Wraiths. They'll be pretty good at dealing with the high physical damage the Dwarves can dish out, at least if they're supported. Got a White King, got a lot of Skeleton Spearmen, got 2 White Kings actually, and in addition to that he has got Vlad von Carstein as his legendary lord, one of the better legendary lords I have to say. And he's got a lot of Grave Guards, so a pretty standard vampire army, a swarm in all effects. And I'm actually a little bit unlucky to have brought the Cygors in this respect, because the Empire and the Dwarves are the 2 factions which can deal with them the best. Usually this is to do with cannons, but the steam tank will do just as well, and they have got 2. This is a big investment from the Empire. Steam tanks are not cheap, but they will perform very well against my army, and that's who they are facing up against, at least at the start here. He's got a lot of swordsmen. Now these guys won't do quite as well against my infantry, at least not the Gorbals and the Minotaurs, so he's going to have to be careful there. The greatswords will do slightly better, but a little bit of a waste, if I'm honest, because not much of the Beastmen army is armoured, and if they brought Vestigor, it probably means they brought Kazrak, and you don't stand much chance in a melee fight anyway. Franz is a good choice, because he'll be able to poach Malagor if he's unprotected very quickly while he's up on Deathclaw. And handgunners, of course, good choice, because they're so damaging at range. As for the Dwarfs, 3 Grudge Throwers. Now, my Cygor should be able to dish out more damage than the 3 Grudge Throwers because of how effective the magical attacks are. He's got some Slayers protecting them, but we don't have any Flyers anyway, so it's no problem. 3 units of Thunderers, so they've got a lot of gunpowder units. He's got some Iron Breakers at the front. They'll be tough for the vampires to break through, so they've picked pretty well here. And the Longbeards will be good against the Graveguard, and Ungrim will be good against any of my large units that go awry, so in all actuality, they have actually picked relatively well here, but we shall see how it goes. Ooh. Now, first things first, the reason I brought Malagor was because it means I can summon a Cygor, which is good for me. Their artillery is targeting me, all of it, the Grudge Throwers and the Steam Tanks, but they're targeting my Ungor Spears, which is really a bit of a waste. They should really be trying to take down my Cygors, because if they don't, that means I'm going to be able to return in kind with some fire of my own, and indeed, you'll be able to tell from the red stains on the floor here that I am getting some very nice hits on these Empire Swordsmen. Now the Swordsmen are not the best target either, but I figured I may as well start attacking. It's pointless to go after the Steam Tanks. Really what I want to be going for is the handgunners, and I'm just going to be bombarding them while my ally gets into position, because the vampires will be able to wear down a lot of the front line, although the dwarves will be able to hold for quite a long time. My Gorbals will give me the muscle I need in melee for my spears to not rout instantly. Still targeting the swordsman just to give me more of an edge in melee. Malagor, and there's my second Cygor, my summoned one. This one will degrade over time, but it will still get enough damage done to make it worth it. Considerable amount of punishment the Cygors can dish out, and I'm a big fan of the Cygors. I am now targeting the handgunners as well. The Steam Tanks do worry me, because my Spears are not going to be able to do particularly well against the Steam Tanks, but again, they're still targeting my Spears, and they're all too happy to accept that damage. Follow this rock into... and it just about manages to clip some handgunners, which is good. He's taking his greatswords out wide, which I didn't actually notice at this point, but that's okay, because I've got my Ungor Raiders ready. I'm sending up Malagor as well, just behind my Spears, because he has some decent Law of the Wild spells, which can buff up my line. Although he is not particularly fantastic in melee, it must be said. Of all the Beastmen Lords, he is by far the worst in a sustained fight. Now this is a bad idea. He's managed to blob up his troops for nice juicy boulders from my Cygors. He's also retreating his steam tank, so some questionable decisions have been taken here. And that was a solid hit. Able to get some kills on the handgunners and some damage onto the swordsmen. They're even, well, they're wavering at this point because of that hit. But all I need to do is stay in position until my ally arrives. The vampires do need to engage after all. And I'm just sat here waiting, but they haven't targeted the right men. If they had targeted my Cygors, I would have needed to go to them to fight. But as it stands, they are having to come to me because I'm managing to pick off their handgunners. And these swordsmen are not going to do particularly fantastically in melee when my Gorballs get into the action. My Gorballs are heading forward now. My Minotaurs are protecting my Cygors from Franz and from the steam tanks who are now coming in. Although this unit of Minotaurs is going to be attacking them. The arrows won't do too much against the steam tanks. My Ungor are in guard mode, I believe, but that's not going to help them against the steam tanks. They're just going to plough through. These swordsmen are taking a battering from my Cygors as they come forward, though. Even with the support of the handgunners. Now, they should win in melee against the Ungor if they were on their own. But with Gorbal here, they're going to struggle. Now, Karl Franz does come down, and he gets a good charge off on Gorbal. And Gorbal is ill-equipped to deal with Deathclaw. So this Gorbal will go down relatively quickly. However, Franz, the Cygor, is just battering the swordsman line. It did also get some friendly fire there. Gorbal is not anti-large, so he will not do very well against Karl Franz in melee. However, to bring your lord down here is risky because the Minotaurs with great weapons are anti-large. And also my ally brings in a Wind of Death, which deals the swordsman some significant damage. And now that my Minotaurs are in melee, Franz is going to drop very, very quickly. So he did manage to kill my Gorbal, and I'm also buffing up my... Well, I'm actually using Devolve on the Empire units to give them a bit more of a problem in melee. The Minotaurs are going to deal significant damage to Franz. Meanwhile, the steam tanks are causing me some distress, but ultimately the steam tanks are only going after lesser tier units. So again, that's an interesting thing that's going on here. Franz has taken significant damage. If we go back over to here, we'll see the vampires finally engaging the dwarves. The Iron Breakers throwing their satchel charges. Going to do significant damage, but the vampires of course can replenish, so they're going to do okay here. The Graveguard are not going to do particularly well against the Longbeards. I would have put skeletons against them, and my word, the frame rate drops. But yep, the vampires, classic, just bunch up on the enemy. We missed Franz dying, so I brought in both my Minotaurs to kill the enemy lord, and there he is, dead on the floor, face down in the dirt. And this is a real problem for the Empire, because now they don't have their lord, and Empire units don't have the best morale. The steam tanks are unbreakable, but they're not going to do well against terror-inducing units such as Minotaurs, Gorballs. And now I'm able to focus on their steam tanks with all my high damage units. All the while my Cygors, well, my one Cygor, my other one decayed into nothingness. But my Cygor is still throwing rocks at the handgunners, so they're still struggling. The Empire is managing to regroup some of their forces back behind their handgunners, and one of them is a greatswords unit. But most of their forces have now routed off the field, and this steam tank I believe is all that's left. Yes, because one of the steam tanks blew up in melee over here to the Minotaurs. And this one is trying to run away, but he's not really getting very far. And a lot of my spears have returned from routing, so I still have numbers. A real problem for the Empire, and they really targeted the wrong units early on here. Their steam tank should have been going for the Cygors. Over here, on the other hand, it's much closer, but the vampires are really starting to overwhelm the dwarves. Or dwarfs, I should say. And while they will trade efficiently with some of the units like Graveguard with their Longbeards, ultimately they are going to struggle to stuff like the Cairn Wraiths, who have managed to slip in behind here. Ungrim is really the saving grace at the moment because he does such high weapon damage and he's so hard to kill. He's also unbreakable, so he will stay there forever, but the Cairn Wraiths are going to do a very good job against the dwarves here. And the main line of the dwarfs is also going to be under the threat of the replenishing of the vampires, and now there's a big flank coming from Vlad and his Swordsmen. So yeah, the dwarfs are also in big trouble, and now my army is coming down. The second steam tank fell, so now I'm just going to charge down the hill There are some regrouped Empire units in the trees which I spotted, so I have kept some units back just to cover them, but other than that I'm just charging forth and helping the vampires flank. And the minotaurs and the Gorble are not going to be stopped by the dwarfs. The armor piercing on my units is going to basically be the final nail in the coffin for the Empire Dwarf Alliance here. The grudge throwers I think were a bit of a waste, honestly, because they weren't able to trade efficiently with my army, and they wouldn't have been able to trade efficiently with the vampires either. They really should have brought cannons, and that would have really hurt my army in particular, because they would have been able to kill my Cygors with relative impunity. I wouldn't have been able to stop them, and I would have needed to be the aggressor. Meanwhile, Gorble is going to make short work of the grudge thrower crew, and I'm just running all over the dwarf backlines. Their main line is actually holding relatively well, and that's mainly because of the Iron Breakers. They're still holding well, even despite being surrounded by Cairn Wraiths and Graveguard, but ultimately they will fall to attrition. Even if I wasn't to reinforce them, I'm pretty sure they'd fall to attrition. Meanwhile, what's this? A unit of skeleton warriors being raised. So that's good. More and more troops, and Ungrim and Vlad are having a duel in the midst of battle. That's cool. I think Ungrim would be able to pretty substantially beat Vlad in a 1v1. But unfortunately it's not going to be a 1v1 because Vlad's undead hordes are going to assist him. Hold on a moment. I needed that. But yes, this battle is really all but over. Really, Ungrim not being... well, Ungrim being unbreakable is what's going to draw this battle out a little bit longer. Because all of his army is routing, the Empire is routing, I'm chasing them away with Minotaurs in the distance. There is still a unit up here in the trees, I believe. Oh no, they routed. Well, they tried. Well, let's see the last stand of Ungrim Iron Fist, as he is swarmed by Cairn Wraiths. Did he manage to kill Vlad? No, he didn't. Well, Gorble is going to make quick work of him at such low health. Oh dear. Fulfill your Slayer oaths, Ungrim. And there we go. The enemy lord is dead, and that is it. So that was a Pyrrhic victory, but ultimately I think that the enemy armies were actually pretty well designed to deal with ours, but the Empire player didn't really target my units correctly. He should have gone for the Cygors and the high priority targets as opposed to just trying to chip away at my spears. And I think the Dwarfs were a little too passive. They targeted me as opposed to the vampires, and if you do that to the vampires, if you just let them wash over you, you're in for a world of hurt. And while their units individually were able to deal relatively well with the vampire units, there were just too many of them, and they weren't focusing their attention enough to cause significant damage to the vampires or to me. So let's have a look at the overall stats. So yeah, 130 kills for the Cygor. They really should have... This is one of the reasons I like the Beastmen. I like this build, mainly because of the Cygors, and usually the Empire and the Dwarfs are the two factions which it doesn't really work very well against. But in this case it did. The Spearmen, of course, not getting a lot of kills. This Gorble was mulched by Franz, but this one did relatively well. The Minotaurs, of course, killed Franz and managed to do significant damage to the steam tank and enemy infantry, so I was very happy with them. The Dwarf infantry did very well against the Vampire infantry, but ultimately they were outflanked by the sheer numbers. So let's have a look at the Vampire. Vlad von Carstein getting 188 kills. They really didn't have much of an answer to him. The Cairn Wraiths did okay, the Swordsmen did okay. The Skeleton Spears were not particularly fantastic, but the numbers really occupied the Dwarfs to the point where they didn't really have an answer, especially when the Empire started to collapse. And the Empire player, this was really where things were lost. The steam tanks got a lot of kills, but they didn't get any chaperons. This means it was all on Ungor spears. So yeah, a bit of a waste. The Greatswords did okay, but again, it's a matter of targeting the units that you need to get off the field quickly. And I feel that that's what this battle shows more than anything. The Beastmen are probably my favourite faction. I've had the most practice with them. And this is just one of the builds I use with the Beastmen. I might show a more infantry-focused build with either Morga or Kazrak at some point in the near future. Or I might show a bit of vampire action, because that's another faction I quite like. Or the Empire. Those are the three factions I've taken a bit of a shining to. And I hope that you'll join me for more Reforged and more Warhammer in the future.